Bitcoin isn't a spectator sport, it's a responsibility. Many of us seem to desire safety instead of freedom. We want our financial burdens eased, our material desires fulfilled, rather than to engage in resistance against the systems that have time and time again undermined our liberty. Governments in particular are very good at selling us on an easy button, whether free healthcare, universal basic income, affordable housing, or we'll pump your bags if you elect us. And Bitcoin gives us that chance, but it won't be handed to us. We have to protect it, promote it, and most of all, to live it. Bitcoin only wins if it is used as money, as currency. Bitcoin is for enemies, right? So if Wall Street wants in, who am I to say they shouldn't be here? Take 100% self-custody of your Bitcoin and please run a node. They want us convinced that Bitcoin isn't to be used in some meaningful way, but rather to sit there passively accruing value. These are Bitcoiners who are suddenly cheering on government adoption of Bitcoin, buying fiat products backed by Bitcoin. And this is exactly what I believe governments want. This is the PSYOP. Hey everyone, I'm Michael Jordan. No relationship to the basketball player, as you can clearly see, but with a name like that, you can imagine how bullish I am. So I've been deep in the Bitcoin rabbit hole for 3 years now, and while my belief in Bitcoin has never been stronger, neither has my concern. Concern not about the usual suspects, not the crypto casinos or the rug pulls, not that governments could ban Bitcoin, or even that the recent op return saga could have been the end of everything. Today, I'm focused on a different kind of threat. It's not external, it's not malicious, it's a mindset. It's one that creeps in quietly. It's the slow drift into complacency. It's the belief that Bitcoin will fix everything without us, that we can sit back, cheer on nation-state adoption, buy shares in fiat companies with Bitcoin strategies, and pat ourselves on the back for being early. But Bitcoin isn't a spectator sport. It's a responsibility. My own journey started with selfish motives. I wanted digital scarcity. I wanted number go up. I wanted to retire early. But then my son was born, and everything shifted. I started to imagine a future world that he might experience, a world where a teenager can be sent to die in some senseless war for the benefit of politicians and weapons contractors, a world where other people's kids go hungry so my country can prop up its empire through debt and manipulation, a world where sickness is profitable and health is a threat to quarterly earnings. A world where bankers gamble recklessly over and over, knowing bailouts will save them while regular people pay the price. And that's not good enough, not for me, not for my son, and not for our future. What I want is simple. I want a world where value isn't stolen through inflation, where war isn't waged for profit, where money is honest and incentives align with human flourishing, not human suffering. And Bitcoin gives us that chance, but it won't be handed to us. We have to protect it, promote it, and most of all, to live it, because if we don't, the very thing we hoped to escape could creep right back in under a different name wearing a Bitcoin logo. I'm going to assume, for the sake of continuing this presentation, that this is what you all want, a world of greater prosperity, of great peace and abundance. And I'd imagine most of us agree that Bitcoin offers a hope to make that dream a reality. And the amazing thing is we have the ability to do so if only we have the conviction and courage to do the work to make it happen. But if the money printer isn't defeated once and for all, if militaries aren't using Bitcoin to buy fighter jets and ammunition, if bankers aren't constrained in the risks they take, I'm less confident we'll see the bright orange future we all hope for. Bitcoin only wins if it is used as money, as currency. That's what I'd like to talk with you about today. There has been much discussion as to whether or not Bitcoin winning is inevitable, but that depends entirely on how you define winning. The Bitcoin network's existence is inevitable because I know for myself and a few other Bitcoin psychopaths out there, we'll be running our nodes and solo mining with our bit access till the day we die. So you don't have to worry about it failing in any ultimate literal sense. If you define Bitcoin winning as number go up and all of us getting fabulously wealthy, then I believe that outcome to be very, very likely as well. Bitcoin is a scarce digital decentralized money capable of being secured without counterparty risk, transferred without intermediaries, and transacted without fear of censorship, and completely trustlessly. That is a powerful, powerful idea, and it would make sense that at the very least, millions of people, corporations, and governments would desire it as a reserve asset. So, as a number go up investment, yeah, I think Bitcoin wins. Gold's done pretty well for quite some time, and we all know why Bitcoin, while possessing some common qualities, is far superior. But if you define winning as the separation of money and state, the elimination of the forever wars, or even the opportunity to have a reset of our cultural incentives and get us back to a place of sanity, I'm less confident. The threat is not that Bitcoin isn't currently winning or that it doesn't have what it takes to win, but rather in how it appears Bitcoiners are reframing what winning means to begin with. My concern is that we are losing the plot and that doing so could have real material consequences. Many of us seem to desire safety instead of freedom. We want our financial burdens eased, our material desires fulfilled, rather than to engage in resistance against the systems that have time and time again undermined our liberty. This is a terrible trade-off to make. As Benjamin Franklin said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Okay, so this is a chart I totally made up, but I think illustrates an important point I'm seeing in online discourse and even at conferences related to Bitcoin. So over time, there's a general upward trajectory in the number of Bitcoin maxis, which I roughly define as people seeking out ultimate sovereignty, opting to leverage Bitcoin as a freedom-maximizing tool, and with a desire to promote global access to a better, incorruptible form of money. But the trend I'm seeing outpacing the growth of Bitcoin maxis are what I call number go up maxis. These are Bitcoiners who are suddenly cheering on government adoption of Bitcoin, buying fiat products backed by Bitcoin, and willing to take on lots and lots of counterparty risk for convenience and the illusion of safety. And to be clear, this is a trend that I would anticipate happening more into the future, because the longer it takes someone to adopt Bitcoin, the more inclined they'll be, or the less inclined they'll be rather, to do the work, to read the books, to listen to the podcasts, and to really dig in to understand the problems Bitcoin solves. But my fear is that this is happening too early, and in large part because of Bitcoin influencers and other Bitcoiners who are overly eager to reap fiat financial rewards. If you're on X, you probably see these accounts incessantly talking about Omega candles, Wall Street joining in on the action, nation-state strategic reserve adoption, and a host of other admittedly bullish indicators for Bitcoin's fiat-denominated price. And to be clear, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these things. I think Omega candles are coming, and Bitcoin is for enemies, right? So if Wall Street wants in, who am I to say they shouldn't be here? I'm not personally a fan of governments buying Bitcoin, but I've heard really smart people make compelling cases for it. The problem is, all of this is a distraction from a much bigger point. There are fewer and fewer people today talking about Bitcoin as a technology that liberates and promotes a better world. And it's obvious why. Because we as humans are inherently selfish. We love shortcuts and easy buttons, and we think that certain institutions appear to provide those things. Governments in particular are very good at selling us on an easy button, whether free healthcare, universal basic income, affordable housing, or we'll pump your bags if you elect us. In just the last few months, we heard from the US Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, said that Bitcoin is a commodity, it's not currency. A lot of people are cheering this guy on as a serious Bitcoiner, but he seems to have missed the peer-to-peer electronic cash part of the Bitcoin white paper. We hear narratives of Bitcoin as a digital version of gold, which has historically helped people preserve purchasing power, but it's rarely used in commerce. It's a useful analogy at times, but it's far from complete. We hear Bitcoin compared to Manhattan real estate in the 1970s, something you hold and never necessarily actually do anything with. We hear about the ways that Bitcoin could strengthen the dollar rather than threatening its very existence. We hear talking heads on Wall Street evaluating what allocation this asset should have in your portfolio while pushing for paper Bitcoin products with fees and third-party custodianship. And of course, we have politicians here in the Czech Republic and across the pond in the US discussing strategic Bitcoin reserves, which would presumably include Bitcoin purchased from you using counterfeit money. We can almost smell the victory of our Bitcoin going up in value as we imagine a life of financial ease and flexibility as a result of nation-state game theory playing out and big players making big Bitcoin purchases. Language is a powerful tool. And in an age of 24-hour news cycles and addictive and free social media, the words we use, choose, and fall prey to, in many cases, determine our reality. So much so that Joseph Goebbels, the chief propagandist of the Nazis, said if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes accepted as truth. So let's look at a few examples. So this picture, this is definitely not a picture of war. And this one, also not war. And this, you guessed it, not war. These, ladies and gentlemen, are military interventions. Just ask your political overlords. War is such an ugly word, but a military intervention, well, these are done out of necessity, not cruelty, even if it pays the bankers and the military-industrial complex the same, and lots of people die. So ignore the graphic imagery, because it's totally not war. Don't for a moment think that central banks are printing money. It's just quantitative easing, or it's just a liquidity injection, or just a short-term lending program to troubled banks. One of my favorites, what we used to call global warming, has since been rebranded as climate change. I'm assuming the weather stopped cooperating and they needed some reason to sound the alarm regardless of which direction temperatures were heading. And then we have public-private partnerships, where governments pick winners from the private sector and help them out. During COVID, the US government helped pharmaceutical companies streamline approval of the vaccines and gave them indemnity to avoid future liability, all while locking us up and ensuring that we couldn't continue to work. By the way, our friend Howard Lutnick, who I mentioned before, that guy thinks if the US does this again, the government should benefit from the stock pump of these companies by investing in them through a sovereign wealth fund. That used to be called crony capitalism or insider trading, but of course the word crony has sort of a stigma attached to it. Partnership is much more palatable to the masses. And here's just one more for you. In the US, we have all these debates about the legality of assault weapons. A lot of us just call them semi-automatic rifles, which have been used for ages in hunting, for home defense, and for sport. But semi-automatic doesn't have quite the menacing ring to it as assault, so here we are having politicians who know nothing about firearms debate which of these two guns, which operate identically, is legal and which isn't. All of these bastardizations of the language we use has had real-world consequences. The world has been fighting a lot of definitely not wars for the last 75 years. And remember how we increased our money supply by some 40% in the years following COVID? Well, it wasn't money printing, though, just QE, so don't even worry about it. I could go on. And if you all were my wife, I probably would. I think you get the point. The words we use to describe a thing, in many cases, change our perception and then ultimately alter how we interact with it. And the same is true in Bitcoin. My fear is that we are internalizing a narrative about what Bitcoin is that doesn't align with what it needs to be if we want to claim victory in a bright orange future. If Bitcoin is merely a commodity, it's just this thing we'll trade here or there for more dollars or euros or Czech koruna. If it's merely digital gold, just sit on it to preserve our wealth long term. If it's merely digital capital, we'll stockpile it for our businesses, and I'm not really sure what exactly we'll do, but it won't be used as currency. If it's merely an investment, we'll sell it to rebalance our portfolio to optimize for greater fiat gains. And this is exactly what I believe governments want. This is the PSYOP. They want us convinced that Bitcoin isn't to be used in some meaningful way, but rather to sit there passively accruing value, preferably in a centralized honeypot. You see, governments will never opt for or promote Bitcoin as money, as currency, because it strips them of their most fundamental source of power, the money printer. It is by this advertising campaign, Bitcoin is a commodity, digital gold, and so forth, that we achieve this superficial pump to our financial lives while failing to win in a much more substantial way. And by the way, being rich in a world that is crumbling won't be quite the party we might hope it would be. So what do we do about this? First, we fervently reject these narratives and stop simping for governments because we think it might make us rich. There's nothing less attractive than a Bitcoiner talking about freedom and fix the money, fix the world, and then turning and asking daddy government for permission to use Bitcoin or begging them to buy it for your own personal financial benefit. It's an ugly look, and it's entirely counterproductive in our fight for a better world. Second, we need to stay focused and reorient ourselves to the reality of what Bitcoin is, peer-to-peer electronic cash. We need a large, committed group of Bitcoiners who will do everything they can to make purchases in Bitcoin and to accept or even demand accepting payment for Bitcoin in exchange for their labor, products, or services. With enough demand for Bitcoin as currency, we can affect change and over time, force big players to play ball. I recently asked the farmer who supplies my raw goat milk if she'd accept Bitcoin. She doesn't really know much about it, but she said yes, because she understands that there's something to it. So now she and I are adding to the Bitcoin circular economy together, and it was an easy ask. To be clear, I'm talking about a spend and replace approach. So whatever fiat you would have used to make a purchase, instead use it to buy the sats that you spent. This requires diligence, conviction, and sometimes sacrifice. Nobody said it would be easy, but if your time preference is sufficiently low, you'll go the extra mile or kilometer to make it happen. Next, we all need to take self-custody, and I'm not talking about having a controlling majority of your private keys. I'm talking about you being the only person who knows how much Bitcoin you have, securing all of your keys free of counterparty risk, leveraging open source tools that can't be censored or misused, and acquiring the skills necessary to use Bitcoin properly. I'm talking about running your own node to increase your privacy and add to the decentralization of the network. This whole thing only works if we take responsibility for the health of the Bitcoin network. Best I can tell, there are far too many Bitcoiners LARPing about self-sovereignty and instead privately trusting third parties with direct custody of their coins or sharing keys with institutions rather than owning the responsibility required to make Bitcoin decentralized and ungovernable. It's also important to bring others along for the ride. If you believe that Bitcoin is the future of money, as I think many of us do, you have a moral duty to share that hope with your friends and family. But orange pills aren't best delivered by force. You need to understand what the problems are and make the case for Bitcoin adoption compelling. It's not simply in demonstrating that your allocation to Bitcoin has outperformed their investments in fiat terms. It's in showing that the fiat Ponzi can't last forever and that free markets will ultimately migrate to the best solution available, and that is Bitcoin. If you are unclear on the problem, you're looking for a better way to articulate to people, I would highly recommend reading, of course, Seyfedin's The Bitcoin Standard. One of my favorite books right now, though, is Larry Lepard's The Big Print. And I should have put this on the slide, but What's the Problem? Joe Bryan's video that went viral recently. Make sure you share that with everyone you can. All really fantastic resources, not only to clarify your thinking, but to orange pill your friends and family as well. And finally, make the sometimes difficult decision to opt out of the fiat nonsense by finding new rabbit holes to go down. In the last 3 years, I've opted my family out of traditional health insurance, started growing some of my own food, completely overhauled my diet, removed my kids from the education system, and made a number of other changes that would have never crossed my mind before Bitcoin. And not all of them were easy, but this is such an important thing to understand. The peace of mind that you feel when you begin aligning what you believe with what you're actually doing is beyond anything I could express. We can brute force our way into a bright orange future by applying our demand in the marketplace. I've seen the famous quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world," dozens of times in my life, and it's usually coupled with an inspiring picture, just like this. For the longest time, I thought it to be this major call to action. I had to picket or protest or take up arms or launch some sort of revolution to create change in the world. What I've come to realize over time, though, is that being the change I want to see has much more to do with how I and my family choose to operate. It actually isn't that complicated or difficult. A bit uncomfortable at first, perhaps, but I can't stand on this stage in good faith or even work for a company operating on a Bitcoin standard at the Bitcoin way if I'm not continually progressing personally toward a more self-sovereign future. And we can all do this together. So, ignore the talking heads and shed yourself of the high time preference number go up narrative. Take 100% self-custody of your Bitcoin and please run a node. Spend and replace your Bitcoin. Opt out of the fiat nonsense. Be the change you want to see in the world. It's true, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. But empowered with this incredible tool, with a bit of courage, focus, and discipline, we will change the world together. I look forward to seeing you all in our bright orange future. Thank you.